Hey, Todd. Welcome back to the show, man. It's great to have you back on, brother.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you having me back on.
How you doing out there? You're on location. We'll just say that.
Yeah, I'm in Europe at the moment, and we've been very active dealing with a lot of politics.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Goodness. Well, I can imagine. Well, Todd, for our audience members out there who may not know you, I'm going to point them back to episode 50, which we had you on back then. Man, I can't believe it's been that long ago.
It's been a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. But we had you on episode 50. So folks out there, if you want to check out more details on Todd's background, and that episode is an excellent one, go check that out. But for our audience members that don't know you, just briefly give us a quick bio, buddy.
My name's Todd Fox. I run a security company. My company is focused on music touring and filming on location in foreign countries, and then a small percentage of governmental, small percentage of executive, small percentage of dignitaries. But about 80% of our work deals with dignitaries. My background is military, Marine Corps, law enforcement, SWAT team, and security contracting, OCONUS. And I have a long history in martial arts, a bunch of black belts, and was an MMA fighter in the 90s and still a competitive jiu-jitsu guy. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Awesome. Well, you certainly have an amazing set of clients that folks can go look up on your website and kind of see a few of those that are open source. Yeah, you certainly get around the world a lot and see some awesome things, I'm sure, and get to hang out with some cool people. Certainly. So, real quick, Todd, I just wanted to mention we really appreciate you introducing us to Tim Alexander of Primus. And I was texting back and forth with him the other day, and he said to tell you hello.
Yeah, he's a good dude. I liked him. Yeah, solid man.
Yeah, and that podcast, I don't know if you got the opportunity to listen to it, but he flipped the page on us. It was more about kind of personal protection kind of stuff, and it was kind of cool. But that was a real neat episode. And we've got a lot of feedback on that episode, by the way.
Good.
And it was thinking that it was going to be more about music, but a lot of the audience out there really enjoyed that. Well, Todd, real quick, we're going to move into discussing one of your new books and an upcoming book. I think your fifth book is soon to come out as well. We can hit on that, but real quick before we go into that, how did COVID affect your business? I'm just curious how that went for you.
COVID pretty much shut us down for the most part. It shut down the entertainment side of things. As you know, COVID is and was a very political thing, and you obviously know the side of the aisle that 99.9% of musicians are on, which is a little different than most of the military and law enforcement side. So they gave it up very quickly. They stayed off the road. Shows stopped happening. They stopped filming on location, and the executives stopped moving around. We ended up doing a few governmental contracts, but even that, with respect to running DT for state and federal agencies, that went away for the most part. So, business went from 100% plus to probably 5%. So we
Oh,
effectively were
wow.
shut down during COVID.
I assume that it probably did, and I saw some, a little bit of evidence of that on some of your socials and whatnot. One thing that I did, however, notice you picked up on jiu-jitsu competition a bit during that time, did you not?
I did. It was the first time I've had downtime in almost forever. I've been on the go since I was 17, traveling around the world. So that was a nice chance for me to get a break from the grind and train 2-3 hours a day, jujitsu, Muay Thai, a little wrestling, uh, and ultimately I was able to go back to competition because I had enough time to train and go back to competing at a high level, national, international tournaments as a black belt.
Yeah, and I mean, some of the accolades. I mean, you won U.S. nationals, right?
I did. Yeah,
You won Naga World Championships,
I did.
and there are a couple other a couple others or others that you want to mention.
Yeah, I was really fortunate. I got to train regularly, and I got to go to a bunch of competitions. And I think in the end, I had around 30 matches, and in the 30 matches, I think I won 27. The three that I lost were close by like 2 or 3 points. But in the end, I ended up taking maybe 7 or 8 national or higher level tournaments, and then a few local kind of state level tournaments, and it placed at all of them, obviously. But it was nice. It was a nice change of pace. It was really cool to kind of get to train the way that I wanted to train, and do the things I was doing. And in my history, MMA was called NHB when I was fighting. We no gi was called submission wrestling, and gi jiu-jitsu was just called jiu-jitsu. So I was competing in all three back in the mid '90s, and my style didn't really change. I was in the Marine Corps. We were doing it with kit on, with all our full gear on. So we adjusted to that, and it was good to see that even though I trained a very specific way, that still worked in tournaments. You didn't have to have a flamboyant kind of all over the map point system. You could have a very heavy, focused, simple system that worked for submissions, and it paid dividends for me.
Well, two comments on that. Number one, you got your black belt from Hickson Gracie, correct?
I got my black belt from Rodrigo Vaghi, who is a
Okay.
6th degree black belt under Hickson, and I trained with Hickson in LA. So first I started with Rodrigo Vaghi, and
Okay.
then when I went to Camp Pendleton, the closest guy that was associated with Rodrigo was Hickson. And so I went to train with Hickson for several years. And then when I moved back to St. Louis, I was training with Rodrigo Vaghi, and that was who ended up ultimately giving me my black belt.
Awesome. And I think what I was getting at is to my understanding, of course Hickson especially, but Rodrigo being that fundamental jujitsu that we all knew, from the beginning, like you just said, it still works. Absolutely still works today. Now I'm not anywhere near your level. I did just get my purple belt this last year.
That's a big
Um,
step. Congratulations.
thank you, sir. It was a long road. I will certainly say that, for the way that my job has had me on the road a lot, in and out of capabilities of training. So it was a long road. But I think what I was about to say is that it's huge for our audience. We preach jujitsu, so on and so forth, but we also preach doing the work. And you competing at that highest level, your normal job is security, but you walk the walk. I think that was proof of that. So when I saw that, I was like, "Yep, Todd doing the work and walking the walk." That was really cool.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys now think that you have to have this super complex game and, be based on points and a lot of movement and a lot of positions. And I've always believed that jujitsu is best when it's distilled down to the basics, and you can apply the basics from every position, and you're submission focused. And it was good for other people to see that what I was saying was accurate, that I could indeed take a very simple game of jujitsu, the same stuff that I was doing in a patrol car or underneath something or through a window or, with gear on or without anything on, and apply that in a tournament setting. And that's a big deal. And one thing you said just now is it's been a long road, and I'm traveling probably on average to a different country every 2 to 3 days. In an average year outside of COVID, we're in 60 to 75 countries a year in a couple hundred cities. um, it's always been a long road for me, and I think jujitsu in general is a long road.
Mm.
The road doesn't stop. I've been a black belt for like 16 years, and it doesn't stop. I still have to train. I still have to learn. I still have to understand where the threats are coming from and what they might be, and I still have to deal with that. And I have to keep my timing, and I have to keep my conditioning, and I have to keep my mind sharp. So, jujitsu doesn't stop. It never ends. And one of the coolest things about it is that you really can't master it. I hear a lot of people talking about masters, and in my mind, there's no such thing. Like, we go after it and we attain certain levels. So when they say master in terms of a rank, that's fine. But like, no one masters jujitsu. It's a lifelong pursuit.
You just hit it on the head. That's exactly what I was going to say. It is absolutely, it's a lifestyle. And man, it teaches you so much about yourself in general, how to deal with pressure. You hit it on the head. I mean, I was just on the road for back to back for roughly around a month and a half. And even though I was still working out, found time to get on an open mat at one point. But boy, I was back this last week, and I helped run the 0600 jiu-jitsu program at my gym. And I quickly noticed when we were drilling and then rolling at the end, I'm like, man, it's crazy. You cannot just work conditioning and strength stuff on the road and expect to maintain jujitsu condition, and it was evident.
Yeah,
So, but
the timing goes away, and specific small muscle and stabilizer groups that you use for jujitsu, those go away. And then the bigger thing that goes away is how quick you're connecting points in your mind. And so the mental component is so critical when your mind is conditioned to dealing with very specific struggles that occur in jujitsu. You're used to seeing it and you're able to fire very quickly. When you go away from it, you don't have that, and so it takes time to get that timing back and that kind of mental fight back in you.
get that myelination connected again.
It is,
Yeah,
yeah. Build new synapse and maintain them, and just that's recognition prime decision making from Klein. That's exactly what that is.
awesome. Awesome. Well, listen, buddy, I know we got a little bit of a limited time due to your schedule, so let's jump in. You just had a book come out, Protective Perspective, correct?
Yes, sir.
Um, I have it on order. I have, just full disclosure, I haven't read it yet, but I'm well in tune, I believe, with what the book's about. But man, can you describe for our audience what that's about? And of course, I'm going to have ways to purchase that in the show notes so folks can go out there and grab that. But yeah, tell us a little bit about that book.
Yeah, so historically, the books that I've written have been more like field manuals. So they're about theories and concepts and ideas, and really they didn't have photos, illustrations or diagrams, but no photos. And so I had a lot of people that were looking for photos and they wanted to peek behind the curtain. And, our business doesn't really permit that. So I can't give away too much. But I had a client that I worked with for many, many years, and I had talked to him and said, "Hey, I'd like to stop every once in a while and snap photos over the course of this 3 month tour." And it was the first tour back on a big, rock tour, 15, 20,000 people a night. Um, and he said, "Yeah, no problem. I'd love to. I'm really interested in what you're doing, and I want to support it." And so occasionally we would see bits and pieces of our security structure in play, and I would snap a photo. And so what I ended up doing is making something very simple for people that aren't really into security, but they want to kind of see how it works from a general perspective. And basically, what you have is a book where you have a photo of something that's occurring or something that will occur, and that captures it. And then you have on the adjoining page a summary that kind of gives you some insight into what that is that's happening in case you can't really pick it apart. And we do that, on everything from private jets and tour buses, backstage, dressing rooms, training time, hotels, all of these different things, emergency functions, security functions, arms functions. And it gives people exactly what it's called, a peek behind the curtain. So that particular book, Protective Perspective, is written kind of as a coffee table book, and it's not just an instructional. It's more of just a peek. And we've had some good success with it from people who aren't in the security industry, who aren't in the military, who aren't in law enforcement, who really are just wanting to kind of see what it is that we do and how we're connected to the big picture.
Well, and Todd, to me, being a musician, you see my drums
I
here in
do.
the background. Um, to me, it sounds like it's awesome art, and that's I think what I look forward to. I've seen some of the pictures, and correct me if I'm wrong. You just took them with your iPhone, right?
I did. I did. It yielded a great result. I think we're happy with the result. The people that have responded regarding the book have been broadly happy. So, um, it gives you a perspective that you wouldn't otherwise have. It's not an audience perspective of anything. It's more of an artist perspective, how they see things, how the protection detail sees things, how the management group sees things. It gives you some insight. So if you didn't know anything about the industry, or you knew something about the industry from the outside, but wanted to take a peek from what it looks like inside out, this gives that. It really offers some insight into areas that people aren't familiar with.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it very much. And I just want to mention for the audience out there, um, Todd's other book that is excellent, by the way, "Protection from and for and from Humanity." Right here, I'll if I can get that in the camera there, kind of hard to see, but but yeah, I'll have that in the show notes as well because this is kind of like a manual,
That's
so
a
to
field
speak.
manual. Yeah, that's about systems and processes. The cool thing about that book, from my perspective, is it was written for the everyday person. You don't have to be a security person, and it's written for you to protect your business, to protect your family, the systems, the processes, the ideas, the way that you need to look at your situation, your environment, and all of those systems and processes really come from the military, law enforcement, protective service operations. They're not super complicated. I've distilled them down into common sense approach, and anybody can get that book, learn something from it, and then be able to apply it that same day.
Oh, absolutely. I really, really think this is a great reference for a lot of folks, including myself, whom have a background in some of this. I wanted to mention that because if folks are going to grab your new book, they should grab this one as well because then they'll have both a manual and this artistic representation of what you do as well. So yeah, go grab both books.
It's interesting that you say that too, because I was sent 2 weeks ago a note from a friend. It's like, "Hey, did you know you're a visual artist?" I'm like, No." And I guess wherever he was at in the world, he had Googled my name for whatever reason. I didn't ask him about that, but he had sent a screen capture and it said visual artist. So I like that. Maybe the book created that, but it's funny. I'm used to being an artist as a martial artist, but not a visual artist. So yes, there is an artistic component to that book that doesn't exist for my other books.
Well, I mention this on a fairly regular basis because I believe it represents myself and my brother. Miyamoto Musashi said that you should practice art outside of the martial arts. So, you know, pretty much it's in that same realm, right?
I think so. And I think it changes your perspective, how you look at stuff, how you analyze things, how you see it. It gives you alternative lenses, and that to me makes you more valuable as a human. You can see things from different perspectives. It allows you to interact with different people in different ways. It allows you to kind of search or scan the environment for something that has beauty, or some type of understanding. You're trying to understand things that maybe if you didn't look for the artistic side of it, you wouldn't be able to understand. You just discount and move on, and so you miss things in that.
Well, Todd, I think it's very comparative to how important a say a liberal arts education, the real liberal arts, like we're kind of talking about, the classics, art and understanding literature, all these things. People, I know when I was younger, I thought, that's that's for the that's for the artsy people. Now I was an artist back then as well, but I did not realize how it affected me mentally, how it affected my overall creativity, not just with art or music, but also creativity in the way I write curriculum, for my firearms and combatives curriculum. I believe that artistic background has allowed me a more creative mind when it comes to even stuff like that. Well, your thoughts on that?
I agree. So I don't have an arts background, and I have a very classic, structured kind of German, kind of Austrian approach to many things, except for vacation or any type of downtime where I like to do the opposite and be loose and relaxed. But when you look at war, when you look at fighting, when you look at any type of combatives, there's the science of how the body moves, right? The body moves a very specific way. There are weaknesses in very specific points. So the science remains pretty much the same for most everybody with a few anomalies. What is different is how you approach that science, how you're going to set up your attack, how you're going to make the attack, how you're going to confuse somebody. That's art. And that's why it's the art of war, not the science of war. And so
Good
I
point.
think the value of art in particular for me is to see the asymmetric approach to something, right? As opposed to just create this box and say, you must do it this way. It has to be conventional. And when I came up, I was coming up in a realm where everything was very conventional. And then I got a taste of, an asymmetric, non conventional approach and thought, wow, it's much easier to adapt to things if you can take this approach as opposed to just a rigid kind of structured approach. And accepting those asymmetric approaches really helped me personally dealing with entertainers because they certainly have no structure. They rarely use logic or reason. So being able to see from their perspective, it really helps me. Now, I can't expect them to see from my perspective because that's not going to happen. But I can operate in their world and mine, whereas they can't go into mine. So I think it opens doors. I think it gives you things that you would otherwise not have if you couldn't think from an abstract perspective.
Very, very good answer, Todd. So I think I want to go back to protective perspective for a moment. I mean, I think it's kind of neat that maybe in a accidental way that maybe you may have found, some additional art in your life. So I think that's cool. With that said, is there any one particular or maybe a couple of examples that you want to bring up that were moments that you captured that at the time may have not seemed as significant, or maybe at the moment it was significant? Are there a couple of examples that you want to bring up so our audience can kind of know what they're getting in that book?
From Protection Forum from Humanity, it's really focused on how to think, how to look at a situation, how to break it down into pieces, and then address each of those individual pieces so that you have the outcome that you're going after. Um, and so one really simple piece of that book exists in military and law enforcement as well, is looking at the motives for human compromise, right? So what corrupts people? What makes people make bad decisions or do bad things? And typically that comes down to mice, MICE, money, ideology, coercion, compromise, or ego. And we talk about that in that book, and I have to understand when I'm going into these different markets how this culture, let's say in Eastern Europe, behaves, how they make decisions, how they look at things, and also how they're likely to be compromised, because that's a weakness that I have to deal with. A lot of the markets that we work in are operating on bribes, right? What we call bribes. In the government terms, we would call them facilitation fees that we have to pay. But that is not acceptable in the U.S. because bribery only happens at the very highest level in the U.S. But when you talk about local police, if you tried to pay a local U.S. police officer, for the most part, you're going to jail. So when I get to these foreign countries, I am inserting myself into their environment. It's not them having to adapt to me. I have to adapt to them. And I need to understand these key components. So if I start to understand how humans are manipulated, how they see things, how their culture functions, it allows me to integrate easier and I can assimilate in a way that allows me to do my business at a high level. And so the book addresses all of those different things. How, for example, if I'm in, we mentioned Germany and Austria, people are very specific. They're very direct. They're very detail oriented. They talk about, I was there at 3:57 p.m. And they don't say p.m. They use military time, but let's say I was there at 3:57 p.m. I was with this person, this person, this person. There was a black car. It was parked this way. Very, very detail oriented. Whereas if you're in the Middle East, they're much more vague and ambiguous. Yeah, I
Mhm.
was there last week at, I don't know, sometime it was sunny out and there were people around, and they're almost aloof in many ways. And so if I was talking to a German and they were behaving that way, I would say they're hiding something, they were concealing something from me. But if I was talking to, a Middle Eastern person, that would be normal. The baseline of normalcy would be established, and vice versa. If I'm talking to a German and they're just very vague and ambiguous, something's wrong. That's not how they generally behave. And assuming I don't have a baseline on the person already, I would say something's off. So knowing these things, understanding these things, understanding how they fit into the big picture is really important, whether you're on a vacation or you're on a business trip or you're alone or you're with your family or you're doing the work that I do. Those things really help you to function at a high level. And it also helps you to shortcut the penetration into that particular culture.
Very good, very good. So, Todd, I think this might be a good opportunity because we're kind of on that subject or similar subject. Could we take maybe how you prepare for a new venue and maybe describe some of that,
Sure.
without, PERSEC or OPSEC issues, and compare that to way a person or maybe even yourself prepares to go on vacation to a new location and or go to a swanky restaurant downtown somewhere, a new place. Can you kind of give some broad, recommendations on how to do that in
Yes.
comparison to your job?
Sure. So we'll talk about my job, and then I'll talk about how it's a little bit different as a private individual at home or on a vacation. But my job is in a constant state of transition. So I am at a private airport, an FBO, and I'm getting off a private jet and going into a private limousine and moving from that private limousine to a hotel, getting out of that private limo into the hotel, from that hotel into a private limo, from that limo to a venue, arena, stadium, a speaking location, and then from that, back into the car, from that car to a restaurant, from that restaurant back into a car, from that car back to the hotel, from that hotel back to a jet. So I'm in a constant state of transition. And in the security realm, any type of security, those transitional states are the most dangerous states. But my job puts me in constant transition, and we don't have a forward operating base or tactical operations or command center or headquarters. We're constantly moving. So the way that I do my work has to be a little bit like being on vacation where you don't have that infrastructure to support you. Also, we don't have international law enforcement authority. Even with a law enforcement commission in the United States, it means absolutely nothing in a foreign country. So we have to operate under the laws of that particular host nation, and we have to fit into how they do business. So for us, what normally happens is we're writing advances. So we write in advance for a hotel, we write in advance for an airport, we write in advance for a venue, a stadium, arena, speaking location, whatever it may be. And we'll send that out, say, 2 weeks, 10 days before we arrive, and it'll have all of the things listed that we want. Then we'll set up a call, usually 3 to 5 days before we arrive, and we talk with those parties that are key players, that are stakeholders, and we'll discuss these different things. And they'll talk about things maybe that are not something they want to write out or talk about publicly. And then on day of, we'll typically have an advance person. They may be there 2 or 3 days in advance, and they're doing physical walkthroughs, and they're taking photos and videos, and they're putting together an advance package and then sending it back to us. And that will have all the details on the venue, on the hotel, on the private airport, on the restaurants that are likely to be visited, on the tourist sites they're likely to go to, on the key players that we're going to be dealing with. So we have their face and their name and a little bio on them. So that gives us some backstory. And then we have the actual application of that. So once we're on the move, we got that package, we looked at everything. We have an advanced person who's our contact, and they're walking us through the process, but ultimately we're protecting the principal. And then after that, we're moving on to the next location, and we're leapfrogging with an advanced guy or a local national who's helping us. So a big part of that transfers over to the private sector as a private citizen going on vacation or having a business trip is just the advanced preparation component. So if I'm going to a hotel in a foreign country, I can look at a map. Google Maps is good enough. I can see what's around it. I can get the name of that neighborhood. I can look at what occurs in that neighborhood in terms of crime. I can go to the State Department site and pull a crime and safety report and look at what the common crimes are in that country. I can look at what populations are like. I can look at what networks are like. I can look at phone lines. I can look at all kinds of data and figure out how things move in that country. In my case, I'm going to all of these countries over and over and over again. So very rarely will I go to a new country. I don't even know how many they recognize at this point, 210-ish countries that are recognized, and I've been to 151 of them now. So it's rare for me to go to a new
Wow.
country. But for a person that's going to a new country, they can pull that data and start to look at it. They can look at, what are the people dressed like? What kind of clothes they wear? What's the currency? What's the language that those people speak? Can I learn a few basic phrases? What about the music that they listen to? What about, videos that they watch? What about, norms? Like if where I'm at right now, for example, is a heavily Muslim area, and so you're going to hear call to prayer. You need to know the times of day that's going to happen, where the mosque are, what is the holy day. For example, I'm in a place where Friday is the holy day. If I was in a Jewish location, Saturday would be the holy day. A Christian place, Sunday's the holy day. So those things affect when you're moving, what's available to you, what's open, what's closed. Knowing holidays, local or national holidays, that's another factor, right? Because it's going to change. People are going to be off work. Traffic may be increased. Maybe businesses are closed. Maybe they're not. Maybe more businesses are open. So all this stuff is available online, and when you have a network, it helps. And how you develop a network is through entities or areas that you already have in the US. So if you're a runner, there's going to be a group of runners in whatever country you're going to, and tapping into that existing network where you have some familiarization and you may want to meet those people anyway, that helps. Hey, I'm going to be in town at these dates. Maybe don't give that person that you don't know the location of the hotel or the name of the hotel or too many personal details about you, but start to get or glean information from them. So you can develop these networks that way. You can look at what's going on with their governments in a given time. You might not want to be going to Venezuela right now, for example, but sometimes you don't get to pick and choose. So that kind of stuff will really pay dividends. When I go into a hotel, knowing who the key players are in the hotel, it's big. Knowing who else is staying in that hotel, meaning what kind of traffic they're going to generate. Are they going to pull good guys in, bad guys in, people who are friendlies, people who are on the opposite side? What are their movements like? Are they going to jam up, entryways? Are they going to jam up, exits? What are my alternatives? I have different points of ingress, different points of egress. I have service elevators. I have back doors. I have loading docks. I have subterranean entrances that might be parking structures. How do I utilize those things? What are available to me? I start to develop that on the front end. And right now, to be quite frank, that can be done in 20 minutes. And I can be pretty detail oriented on that type of an advance. So as a private citizen, if I'm going on holiday or on vacation, I can go online, collect all this data and information. I can cross verify it with another source. I can look at a topographical overview of it. I can look at the street view. I can look at the city view, and I can start to pull up what shops are next to it. A lot of information's there. I can see how high end those shops are. That pretty much tells me what the area is going to be like, right? There are certain cultural norms and certain kind of urban norms, typically where the airports are not the best area. There are a couple exceptions to that. For the most part, that's not the area that you want to be in. Um, you know, these little factors can change what I do and how I do it or when I do it. The lighting conditions, right? I prefer to do things when it's light out if I don't know the area very well. So knowing sun up, sun down, sunrise, sunset, it's pretty important. Knowing how people talk about time, that's pretty important. Knowing, what holidays are going to be celebrated when I'm there. So I know that's seemingly long-winded, but that's about as short as I can be to answer that particular question.
Well, and Todd, I think I think it's important, and I say this all the time. I was um, listening to another podcast from another gentleman, Lee Weems, a good friend of ours, and I was driving, back and forth to work when I listened to this podcast. Now there was good enough information where I said, "Hey, I've got to sit back down and write some of these notes down of stuff I want to follow up on." And I did that later in the afternoon. I think it's important for audience members out there when they hear some of these recommendations that Todd is making. Sometimes it's good to grab the notebook and make sure that you follow up on some of these aspects in case it's something you need in your practices. That said, Todd, let's speaking of hotels. I think it would be a good opportunity. Maybe if you could make some recommendations for folks out there traveling that may not be used to traveling a lot. Like what rooms you would prefer yourself. Position with inside the building. Just little um, SOPs that you go through personally that could help audience members out there.
Yeah, that's going to be very different than what I do for business because, for example, ideally, I would be located on the second or third floor, something that I could jump from and survive, or something that I can tie together sheets or other string like cables, cords, whatever I could find, and actually get down without any serious injury. In reality, in my case, we're dealing with really high floors because that's where presidential suites are. Presidential suites are not on the entry level floors. But if I'm thinking about an average person, I'd want to be on the second or third floor. I would want to stay in a hotel that has some type of key card controlled elevators or lift systems. I want to make sure that the emergency exits are crash bars where they can't go in reverse order. I'd want to make sure that I am down the hall from the elevator or lift. Normally, that means one, you're not hearing all the noise and people aren't randomly picking your room and then jumping on the elevator after they do something bad. It typically means you're closer if you go toward an end to a stairwell. So getting out is better. So when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about what floor I'm on, where the room is in terms of the wing of the hallway, where the stairs are, where the elevator is. I'm thinking about what's in the room. How's the room structured? What barricading assets do I have in a room? If it's two beds in the room, which bed am I sleeping on? How close is it to the glass in the window? How close is it to the door? Is there a bathroom between? Is a bathroom on the other side? Do I have tables and chairs that I can utilize? What electronics do I have in there? What kind of cables can I use or cords can I use in the room? That's how I'm looking at a hotel room for me. And it takes me 5 minutes to do it. And, 99% of the time, nothing is going to happen. But the 1% that it does happen, I'm ready to go. I'm not stressing. I'm not panicking. I'm prepared.
Yeah, and you've already thought through it. I think that's something that we emphasize on this show a lot is that as long as you've thought about it, visualized, rehearsed it in your head, man, you are way ahead of the game. To me, one of the excuse me, goodness gracious, get choked up a second. I try to do that. Anytime I'm traveling myself, I try to choose my room. And sometimes it annoys my colleagues because I'm up there holding the progress of other people, including them. But it's just so important to me that I set myself up for success whenever I can. So I mean, I travel around overseas as well, so I try to use all these principles as best I can whenever I'm traveling, because sometimes it's really nice in the area I'm at, sometimes it's not so nice.
Yeah, and violence and problems can happen anywhere. And in fact, if you have a political leader in your hotel, you have a higher chance, a higher likelihood of having those kinds of problems. Typically, higher end hotels will have security infrastructure already in it. But, on your own, you can do a lot. You can do what we talked about. It can be done in 5 minutes. It doesn't take a lot of energy. You could do simple things like count how many doors from your door to the stairwell, right? And if there's smoke and you can't see and you're crawling, you can count a doorway to the next doorway to the next doorway, and now I'm going down the stairs. So a lot of stuff that you can do is basic, it's simple, it's common sense based, but if something happens, you will survive, whereas people that didn't do it probably won't.
Yeah, very, very, very good point. So Todd, I'd like to make sure because we're going to get close to your time. You got to go in about 15 minutes, right?
I do.
So let's jump real quick to communications. I've of course audience members know that that's a big aspect of my life, both professionally and amateur radio that I also got into for emergency communications. Without getting into, of course, OPSEC or PERSEC issues, can you talk about your guys' communications systems and plans, however far you want to get into that?
Yeah, we usually have a 4 to 5 tier communication plan or structure, and normally most of our work, depending on where we're at, is on radio. So we'll have radio systems, and assuming that we can coordinate frequencies properly. Sometimes it's legal, sometimes it's not, but as long as we can get freaks that we can operate on and have secured and encrypted, we'll use that. Sometimes in certain environments, they'll jam networks, and they'll jam networks for a number of reasons, and that includes cell phones. So our primary may be a radio, our secondary may be our cell phone or personal communication device. Our tertiary tends to be a mesh net, and a mesh net will function off of something like Bluetooth. And depending on what the sightline distance is and what kind of structures you have around you, if you have really thick concrete walls, it doesn't work so far. But for us tested, it'll work from 20 yards out to 150 yards with one system, and another system we have out to a quarter mile with this mesh system that we utilize. So that way, if they jam the frequencies for the radio or the phones, we're able to use this tertiary method. And then you get into other methods like safe havens, dead drop locations where you're dropping a note and moving, and let's say it's not at the safe haven, but that point is where you can make a dead drop, you leave a note or whatever. And we have very specific TTPs on that, but we'll leave a note at a certain spot and then we'll move on to the safe haven or rally point. So those are things that we normally use. It's not often that you get networks jammed up, but when you do, it goes bad real fast.
Well, Todd, I was assuming that you probably had dealt with jamming, or that's a possibility that you guys have to have a contingency for. Makes perfect sense. Now, as far as uh, the written word, you just mentioned, you have it sounds to me like an emergency communication set up through written word. That's a very valuable I don't know, recommendation that even civilians should probably have some physical form of communications. I mean, I know as we were growing up, or at least when my son was growing up, I should specify, we would have, rally points in case we got separated. Folks need to always plan for that. But having some kind of physical way or some kind of fallback point is deeply important. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Very, very cool. So Todd, I think one other question I was going to ask. I don't know if you want to get into this, but again, this is for kind of for folks out there that travel, and sometimes it's not a good idea to have a weapon. Obviously, in some cases, I'm sure that there are many times when you may not be able to have weapons yourself. Are there any situations where you feel like, hey, I probably need to have some form of an improvised weapon? And is that something that you have to deal with, or something that you sometimes have to plan for?
Yeah, we deal with that because we're traveling internationally a lot, and very few places where you can legally carry a firearm. For us, we have some exceptions to that through certain loopholes, but for the most part, we have human holsters in the form of a local national who carries right next to us, and they could say carry a weapon on their person, and then carry a weapon in a bag that's right next to you. So you would have, in an emergency, you would have immediate access. But there are a lot of other things, ceramics and similar that we can fashion and utilize and move from point A to point B. Also environmentally, there are a lot of things in everybody's environment, typically with respect to safety, tools that you will be able to find everywhere and utilize as a weapon. Um, but for the most part, with the people we're dealing with and the places that we're going to, we have firearms. That's
Yeah.
that's the norm. It's very difficult to beat people with firearms without them. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. So that's the way that we tend to go. But individually on our person, we will have other tools that we can utilize. Might not be their primary function, but it will become their primary function if things go sideways.
Yeah, I figured so, and I do remember you talking about it, and I was like, well, that makes sense. That in the locations that you can't have firearms yourself, you have your network, right? You have your network of folks that can be on the ground with you. That makes perfect sense, and of course, that's you doing your job, having that capability, and I've also heard you mention several times that hey, if if shit does go south, then it's not a good thing. Your job is to prevent it from happening ever. Prevent a situation from happening ever. Correct?
Yeah, everybody likes to think of my job as fighting and shooting and driving, which are all really cool and really sexy things that I love. I love all those things. But the reality of my job is to prevent that from happening. So we create a bunch of layers so that it doesn't happen. And if it starts to unfold, we're already gone before it gets to the point where it's nasty. So that's what should happen. If I get to the point where I'm fighting, I do have the skills to have a physical fight, a gun fight, some type of driving engagement. But the reality is that we don't want that, and we should be gone away from it. Our primary objective is to extract or remove the principle from that environment and to see it early on. So if we get an early ID on it and believe that it could unfold, we remove them. There's no reason for us to take the risk. So fighting is not our job. It's actually not even a byproduct of our job in most circumstances. It's definitely an emergency situation, and it's a skill that we need to have. However, if we are engaged in some sort of way, it's a bad day for us. Really bad. Something failed in not just one or two things, but usually three or four or five things have failed before we get to that point.
Well, and the reality is it's really the same for civilians, right? I mean, that is, you just said it just a second ago, the sexy that folks assume. There's a lot of individuals out there as civilians, the sexy is the firearm, the tools themselves, when man, that's really far down the list of what you should be at that point. Most importantly is our awareness, our avoidance skills, more importantly than anything else, and then of course our fitness, our empty hand skills, our medical, well before it goes loud, right? So I mean, it's the same for civilians.
It is the same for civilians, and we say this, and I've talked about this before, but when you talk to humans, especially if you're a cop, they'll say it came out of nowhere. Nothing comes out of nowhere. There are always indicators prior to something happening because nothing just happens. And so, if you can get an early ID on something, you can remove yourself from the situation or barricade yourself or prepare yourself to deal with it head on if you have to. And that's our job. Our job is to put all these preventive mechanisms in place. And as a private citizen, you do the same thing. You do that through having yourself in the right environment at the right time, limiting your exposure when you have to go to a less than ideal environment, going there at the time of day where less things happen, typically daytime, and then getting out as quick as you can. Don't make a big fuss. Don't draw attention to yourself. Get in, do your thing, get out. And really, that's our job. That's our job to do that and set it up for a client. Even a client who wants a bunch of attention, we're trying to minimize that profile when we're in these transitional spaces. Then when they get to the stage or the platform or the speaking agent, then they can be in your face and talking, and you can have all of the international press and cameras and all of that stuff. But up to that point, if we can reduce that signature, we're going to reduce the likelihood of an attack, one in general, but also an attack being successful. So we put all these things in place, and then we hope for the best, but we're trained or prepared for the worst. And that's what a private citizen's doing, basically. So you are aware of your surroundings, right? So environmental analysis, paying attention to what's going on, behavioral cues. I did a podcast last week with some guys who are phenomenal at that. The Arcadia Cognerati guy and the Left of Greg podcast.
Excellent
Those
podcast.
guys, yeah, they're great. Developed the Marine Corps Combat Hunter program. They're really on top of their game. I would advocate for anybody, private citizen, military, law enforcement, whoever, the human behavior techniques and ideas and concepts that those guys teach can be immediately applied in daily life. So that kind of stuff really sets you up for success. Then having hard skills, being able to shoot and fight and drive and do all that stuff is good. Even more important, as you have acknowledged already, is training a martial art. It conditions your body, it conditions your mind. I'm not uncomfortable if somebody takes me down and gets on top of me. I'm pretty relaxed. I'm not uncomfortable if somebody punches me in the face. I've had this done many times. It's normal. You got to get that conditioning, and the only way to get that is through exposure, which equates to training, right? So our job is very similar to the life of a civilian, except we take extra time to do it. So
Well said, and I'll second that. I'm just getting bit. I had not known about the Left of Greg podcast, so when you had said you were on that, I jumped on it and listened to it. Excellent podcast, and I'm going to put that in the show notes as well. What's interesting about this realm of podcasting, and we'll start to close out so you can get to your work, is that we have no qualms with pushing other podcasts. I mean, we are not really competing with other podcasts as much as we just want to put information out there. And man, when I find a new podcast, I'm always pumped. So you gave me a new podcast that I can really get into. So thank you. So
yeah, I
I'll
think
definitely
that's
have that
great
in
for
notes.
anybody. Any of your listeners or viewers. Human behavior is involved in everything we do, everywhere we go, in every single person's life. So these guys are giving tips and tricks on that, and they talk to the best people in the business, and they're studs and they're smart guys, and they've been in bad environments. So that's a great asset for anybody, in my opinion.
Yeah, awesome. Well, listen, Todd, real quick. Of course, I'm going to have it in the show notes, but sometimes folks just want to hear it. Helps them out. Tell everybody how to get in touch with you, or get to your actual socials, all that stuff. Go ahead and give that plug.
Sure. So our company website is tour protection.com. Tourprotection.com is a site that you can go kind of look at the basics of what we do. And our clients that list us, we list them. So we won't list governmental, we won't list executives or dignitaries, but the entertainment ones for the most part are listed. So you can have a look at that. Look at some of the training that we do, see some news, see some podcasts that we've done. And then on Instagram, we don't have much of a footprint, but we are at Tour Training, and give us a follow there and have a look at the content. If you like it, let us know, and we'll keep
Excellent
putting it out.
content on there for certain. Well, Todd, it's been a blessing having you on the show again, brother. We need to have you on more anyway. So,
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. It's good to talk to you again.
yeah, and too bad my brother couldn't be here today, but he's, as I said before the interview kicked off, is Aaron is recovering from a neck surgery. So yeah, he's going to be doing a lot better. His quality of life is going to be a lot better from dealing with those neck issues. He in fact had 2 discs replaced and 1 disc fused, but he's going to have all kinds of movement, and so yeah. Anyway,
Good. I
well,
wish him the best, man. I'm sure he'll have a speedy recovery.
yeah, he will. He's already out playing his guitar. He sent pictures. He's got
It's good
the
stuff.
yeah. Well, Todd, have a blessed day, brother. You take
Thank
care
you.
now.
Same to you. I appreciate it. Good seeing you. Bye bye.
Too, buddy. Bye.